Life is risk.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
Well, hey there, welcome to the show. Now, if you are a new listener, I encourage you to go back and listen to the last couple of weeks because we are in the middle of Retirement Plan Live. This is a live retirement planning case study with a fellow listener. In this case, it's Kim and Joe. And over the last couple of weeks, we've heard them dream up their ideal retirement. And then last week, we helped organize their financial resources. And this week, what we're going to do is we are going to discuss some of the most common retirement risks that we all face. And rather than come up with solutions right here on the show, what I did was I had a conversation with Kim and just broached these subjects to get an idea of her perspective on how they think they're going to be dealing with these. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, next week, I am going to answer a lot of your questions that you've been emailing me about Kim and Joe, about whether their ideal retirement plan is possible, whether we address certain issues, comments on their financial resources. So I encourage you, if you have a question, an observation, an insight that you want to share, send me an email at roger@wwkwealth.com or go to rogerwhitney.com and there's a place for you to ask questions there. Because next week, I'm going to be reading your questions or insights and then commenting on them and answering them so we can start to build a full concept of whether they're going to be able to retire. So that's what we're going to do next week. So go ahead and get me those questions in email so we can have a robust conversation. Now, remember, at the end of this, we are going to have a live webinar with Kim on the webinar where we are going to walk through whether their ideal retirement is possible. So you'll be able to see, along with Kim, the analysis that's done to say, yes, this is possible and let's build some action items, or no, this isn't possible. We're going to have to do some negotiation to come with a workable solution. So you're going to be able to watch right along with Kim as we go through that on a webinar. In addition, once we get a workable solution, we will stress test that solution against a lot of the common risks that we're going to talk about on today's show. The only way you're going to get access to that webinar is by being signed up for 6 Shot Saturday. And the way that you do that is you go to rogerwhitney.com. There's a couple places where you enter your first name and your email, and you'll start receiving those 6 Shot Saturday emails. In the emails coming up between now and March 2nd, I will have a sign-up link so you can register for the webinar, but that's the only way you're going to be able to get finality and see whether Kim and Joe are going to be able to retire and get an idea of how to do some robust analysis to make that decision. So go to rogerwhitney.com and sign up for 6 Shot Saturday. Now, let's talk about some of these common retirement risks right after the important disclaimer. Hey, this is real simple. Don't take advice from Roger Whitney. That's me, the host. This is a podcast. I don't know anything about you. Why would you take advice from me? And you don't know that much about me. Think of this as helpful hints and education. The only people I give advice to are clients that I walk life with as a fiduciary because I know enough about them to be able to speak into their life. If you're looking for a financial advisor or someone to walk this retirement journey with you, go to rogerwhitney.com. Click on Work with Roger, and we can set up a time to have a discussion. But before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, your financial advisor, or your tax advisor, because that's just common sense. Now let's get on to the hot topic of these retirement risks we all have to deal with. Well, in the news today, retirement is riskier than it's ever been before. Yeah, that's right. Retirement is a risky proposition. I mean, let's think about this. All right, if we're going to retire at age 60 today, we got about a 50-50 chance of living past age 90. So we are talking about having to plan for a 30, 40, maybe 45-year time frame out into the future. That is a lot of uncertainty to deal with. There is uncertainty in what's going to happen tomorrow, much less out 20, 30, 40 years. That's scary. Now, we talk about retirement risks, right? We talk about inflation, Social Security cuts, market downturns, sequence risks, and having those bad downturns on the front end. We talk about living too long and running out of money. We talk about dying prematurely and leaving our family in a lurch. All of those things are risks that we have to address that are outside of us. But let's go back to our life and let's talk about our life. This thing called life where we think we have control over things. When we're talking 10, 20, 30 years, how confident are you that you're going to be able to project what your health is going to be like? What your relationships are going to be like? What twists and turns that fate throws at you in terms of disease and car crashes and injuries and lottery winnings and big bonuses and great opportunities and family disownment, all these crazy things that are literally possibilities that are in our life that we really don't have any control over. Life is risk. Now, when we're earning an income and we're managing through that, we feel like, well, we got this great tailwind at our back because we have all of this income coming in that will help us smooth over some of these crazy life events, right? Market downturn? No problem. I got income. I'll just keep investing. Car got totaled? No problem. It's going to hurt for a while, but I'll just keep working and have my income going. Well, in retirement, when you give up that regular paycheck, from a mental standpoint, you feel like you have a sheath with no sword. You don't have the weapon that has gotten you through a lot of life's unexpected events, which is your income. And that gets really scary. Even if you have assets and you can access those assets for a lot of these unplanned for life events, that means your assets will dwindle. There's a less of an abundance mentality sometimes and more of a scarcity mentality. Hey, this is all I got, this money that I've saved up. So you can see why this subject of risk is super important to make sure that you're addressing, but addressing in an appropriate way. So unfortunately, when we look to address a lot of the risks or issues we see in our life, it's very easy just to go grab the duct tape. Everybody knows what duct tape is, right? It's that tape that can literally do anything. In fact, I think there are websites dedicated to all the different uses that you can use duct tape for. You can make wallets, you can make boats, you can do crazy things with duct tape. It's a very good, quick, quote unquote, solution. And I think when we're dealing with these risks, usually we don't think about these risks every day, but when we do think about them, we want to grab something that just feels like we've taken care of it so we can move on. And duct tape solutions are the things we typically grab for. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we're worried about markets, a duct tape solution might be, well, I'm going to go buy an annuity. I'm going to buy hedge funds. I'm going to buy real estate because it's not attached to the markets. I'm going to buy, pick your poison. That is a duct tape solution. Whereas solving the problem, which you are more than capable of doing, especially if you have a great guide with you, solving the problem of doing the work to increase your income or control your spending or finding a sound investment process that you follow religiously and you make lots of little adjustments along the way, can save you a ton of money, can give you a better feeling of control long-term, but it's not going to be the quick fix that a duct tape solution might be. If I'm worried about the markets, selling everything and buying an annuity or buying a rental real estate feels great in the moment. I've solved my problem, but you've bought a bunch of different problems that you haven't even realized yet. So that's an example of what I mean by duct tape solutions. If you think about relationships, let's say you're having a problem in your marriage or problem with a relationship with a child, a duct tape solution would be, hey, let's have a big vacation and have quality time. I think a common duct tape solution for a younger marriage is, let's have another child, right? That's going to fix everything. Whereas actually spending the time of solving the problem means, hey, let's start having weekly date nights and discussing life and staying connected. It's not as quick of a solution. It's not as grand of gesture as the duct tape. but it's going to probably be a lot more effective long term. So that's what I mean by duct tape solutions, which we really have to work to avoid. And avoiding them is pretty hard because I'm going to tell you, you already know this, there are millions of duct tape manufacturers, product manufacturers, with amazingly well-trained salespeople, with beautiful brochures that are scientifically designed to hit your pressure points, and they're all running around looking to sell you duct tape. Perfect example. I can recall in the 90s, the pain point was, I'm not keeping up with this internet bubble. So what we saw from the duct tape manufacturers were mutual fund and investment strategy after investment strategy that had net or internet or new economy in the title, and they raked in money because that duct tape hit the pain point of I'm not keeping up with this internet solution or this internet explosion. Now, fast forward, and after that blew up and everybody was really burned because they were a little bit too aggressive, and they were worried about the market. They were worried about risk and things like that. So what happened is all of the duct tape manufacturers, and I remember this because I lived through it and had some experience with it, they came out with the first principal protected mutual fund, and principal protected this and principal protected that. Oh, you can have market risk and not, or have no market risk or little market risk and have some upside. They manufactured that duct tape to respond to what people were feeling. This happens over and over and over again, and that's what we have to protect against. Now, in a later show, I'm going to give you some simple actions to protect against this duct tape mentality. But for the sake of time and to make sure that I address it as fully as I want to, we're going to postpone that off into the future. Right now, though, I want to have a conversation with Kim and just bring up some of these risks and get her perspective on them, and maybe that'll help you think about them in your life. Okay, Kim, so we've gotten through dreaming up the ideal retirement and outlining the financial resources. Have you listened to yourself?
I did, and it's kind of hard to listen to yourself, but I slogged through. It's good because I forgot what I said exactly, and it's interesting to hear how, not that you edited a lot, but just to hear, again, to let it absorb in.
What I thought was interesting from the ideal retirement conversation was halfway through, you talked about how Joe, he'd retire today if he wanted to, and then that was the ideal, and it was, at the beginning, it was hedged before, probably unconsciously.
It's really hard to swing for the fences when you just completely self-censor yourself. And that's one of the things you pointed out. And it was good to hear that again, because we really, need to consider possibilities.
Yeah, at least at the front end. So today, though, we're going to talk about all the scary stuff, right? We're going to talk about risks to your retirement. So when you think of the future, what are things that you worry about?
Well, like everybody, I think you worry that your years will exceed your money. That's one thing. You worry about catastrophic health events. Things like that really probably are the first things that come to mind.
Okay, just
market risks, obviously.
Yeah. So let's start with market risk. Tell me about your experience investing and some of the good and some of the bad in terms of how you've handled the ups and downs we've seen over the last 10 years.
I tend not to get too worried about it, although I will say I think one of the reasons I was able to be calm is I wasn't as micromanaging as I am now, and that's partly because of us going it alone and leaving our financial advisor. But there were a lot of people around us, my father-in-law, and to a lesser extent, my dad. They made some really poor choices that conventional financial pundits would probably tell you not to do, which is, to wait till it drops out of the bottom and then take it all out. My father-in-law did that a couple of times, and that was painful to watch the repercussions of that. And so I think that was a lesson for us in a, kind of a sad way to learn that.
So how did you handle 2007, 2008? Were you like hypersensitive to it, or did you just sort of
No, and we were still with our advisors, but I don't recall even giving a phone call because by the time, things happened, we really, there wasn't anything to be done. You just needed to hang on and ride it out. And I'm not a really easily rattled person. I tend to go into what can I do about this mode on almost anything that ever happens. Just name it. And I'm going to be like, okay, so what can I do? That control, that perception of control, whether you have it or not. So we wrote it out. And frankly, I was kind of glad to see some money invested when it was down. And I wouldn't mind seeing that. Well, not that, but something like that before we retire. Now, if it's the moment we retire, that's going to freak me out.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question is, do you think that attitude of not getting rattled will change once Joe doesn't have an income?
That's a really good question. I think if we're able to create I kind of like the idea of a bucket approach where you have like a year or two already squirreled away, and I don't know exactly what you put that in. I don't know exactly how you do that. That's really unknown to me. Do you slowly start pulling money out of the market? Do you just, like you said something the other day, beefing up the taxable accounts? So, yeah, I don't know how that works, but my thought is if you have enough for a few years, 2 or 3 years, something like that, then you might be okay to ride some of that stuff out.
Okay. But do you think even with that bucket approach where you have, say, 2 years of cash flow in the bank, right? So you don't have to worry about selling anything. I guess it's mentally hard to know and put yourself there if you saw, 30 or 40% of the value of the only money you had go down.
And if we had to take it out, that would be very concerning just because you are essentially selling it at the bottom and it's not ever going to have a chance to come back when it's out of the market. So I think we'd probably reduce the amount of stocks we had. We're pretty aggressive or semi-aggressive with stocks versus bonds. So
what would you say if you said stocks and bonds? What do you think the mix would be currently of your account?
Oh, right now?
Yeah.
It's probably, I was kind of focused on 70-30 stocks, bonds, and now it's probably around 72-28.
Okay.
So, but I'd probably see, I don't know, I'm just guessing, at least 50-50 would be in retirement.
Okay. And so absent some process, how do you think you'd decide that? You think it would just be intuition?
It's really hard to pull that far back on stocks. It's really an unknown. I don't know how I would decide that, except that I've seen some articles that kind of illustrate, okay, here's what it looks like at 75-25. Here's what it looks like at 100% stocks, and it really seems like 50-50 tends not to get jostled as much as some of the other.
Okay.
It's leaving enough in the market because it's like, as soon as you retire, it's not like you don't need the money to grow anymore. I mean, it needs to grow.
Let me ask you about that. So if Joe retired even in the next 5 years, do you think it needs to grow considering you have a 30+ year time frame still?
Well, you need to beat inflation, I think.
Okay.
You need to cover that at least. Yeah, I do think it needs to grow because, you really don't know what your longevity is. And it would be really great if it could grow enough that it could cover more or less, inflation. And then, that we really don't have to pull a lot out of the principal,
Well, that was going to be another question is, do you think of when you retire that you have to earn the income that it throws off or live on the income your portfolio throws off, never touching principal? Is that how you think of it, of clipping coupons from an income perspective?
I don't know if I've really thought about how it looks that much. It seems like a little bit, I've got a little spreadsheet that a friend of mine put together, and I definitely probably would dip into it a little bit, especially if we retired and then we waited to take Social Security, then you're definitely going to have to pull probably a little bit more out than just what it throws off.
Now, I know in goals, we don't really have a big inheritance target or really any. So by not setting one, if you think about it from a planning perspective, really what that means is it's more of a die broke type of approach, right? Not that you would not have any money at the end.
Yeah. And I have to say in the back of my mind, because I did have a child when I was older and I only have one child, and that child is a male, and not to diss the guys, because I know plenty of guys who are very involved in taking care of their parents, but sometimes, I don't get the impression he's going to live anywhere near where we live. So there's a part of that thinking that if there's money left over, that might be like a self-funded long-term care possibility,
Okay. But if we're not targeting money left over,
Yeah.
not that there won't be, but if we're not targeting money left over, one of the premises of that is that you spend down the money you have, which is eating principal. So
yeah, that's really hard to think about. I mean, it feels a little like that feels a little scary.
yeah, and that would happen really when you're 70, 80, right? Is when you start to see your entire net worth slowly decrease because that's part of dying broke.
Yeah. Well, inheritance goal is really, I won't plan for that particularly. It's a happy accident if it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. The other way to look at it, if it's not an inheritance goal, if we plan on you living to 93, say, I forget what we put in now, but let's assume it was 93 and you actually live to 100, well, you're going to have that extra 7 years of expenses somewhere.
Yeah.
So we'll test against that. So let's go. I'm going to go through some of the common fears that people have and just get your thoughts on how you think of them. We talked about sort of the great market loss if we had another big '08 experience. And we'll go through that when we're on the webinar and actually look at how that might happen. Do you have any major concerns about inflation and hyperinflation and some of the things you see written?
It's funny because most of our working life hasn't been really high inflation. I mean, except at the very beginning when, you're single and you're living in an apartment, we did hear stories about somebody who had it was a double-digit home loan or interest rate. And, you hear about things like that, but we haven't really lived it. So it's really easy to pretend like it isn't going to happen. And I think there's maybe some better focus and controls on that. I might be kidding myself about how the Federal Reserve looks at that. I have no idea. But it is something that my dad is because he's in his 90s, he's seen a lot. He's seen a lot of really scary, ugly stuff when it comes to inflation, to the point where he's lived his life waiting for that to happen again. Like literally has gold and all of this stuff that I don't think it's served him very well over the last 20, 30 years. But that's the situation that I tend to kind of think of the glass as half full because I've seen so much of the viewpoint of the glass being almost empty.
Yeah. And no different than the Depression generation waiting for the next one. Or there's still a lot of people today waiting for the next, Great Recession, the great 2008 market loss again. There are a lot of people that never got back invested because they're still waiting for the next one. Yeah. So that is a very big behavioral tick or behavioral aspect of investing that a lot of people, we all deal with that in some sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I might be a little rose-colored glasses about it because I feel like there's been a lot of negativity around me. And so I tend to be contrarian in that way. But I think it's something that you really have to consider. And I think that whenever you had talked about like 4% or something, even though that sounds a little high right now, if that is what the average is, I think that's smart to kind of, plan for that.
Okay. Now, what about Social Security? Are you worried about it being cut or not having it?
I'm not really.
You are just an optimistic lady, which is not a bad way to be.
Yeah, I'm not particularly. I worry a little bit, and the thing that might be more likely, and I guess this would be a way of it being cut, is means testing. If that pops in where somebody's like, well, you already have this money in your investments, then you don't need this Social Security. I get that. I kind of see that, especially when there are so many people who live only on Social Security. And so that is a little bit of a concern, but can't do much about it until something pops up.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you're right. Means testing is probably the bigger risk than not having it
But that's just how it would get cut. I mean, or it would be taxed more or whatever. It would reduce the amount.
Okay. So it's something, but you can't really plan for that, right? That's just something you have to deal with. It's like you can't plan for the car wreck. You just have to make sure you have cash reserves. So if life happens, you have enough flexibility to adjust to it.
Yeah. And I also hope that there would be a point at which, like, if you're already a certain age, because you couldn't really adjust for that maybe we're already sort of in that sweet spot of where they wouldn't mess with us. Okay.
Now, another one that a lot of people talk about, you see least I see a lot of articles of expected returns. And yeah, the averages have done this in the markets long term, but because of where we're at, we should expect lower returns going forward. Is that something you're concerned about?
It's not a concern, but I do try to pay attention to it because I think there's some validity to once things have gotten highly priced that, how much higher can they go? I don't know. But I mean, then if you're wrong, yay, woohoo, then you do better.
You haven't really changed your investment strategy on any of that.
No, not the strategy or allocation or anything really. It's just more of a, what do I expect to happen? And I kind of had it higher at one point, what I thought it would be. And now it's kind of maybe ratcheted a little bit lower.
Okay. And now the next one I'm going to guess, it's always a concern is, what if one of you dies early? From a financial perspective, where does that leave the other one?
Well, I think the one good thing that we really, besides that being a horrible thought, that is something that when we did have our financial advisors early on, they really emphasized the need for, of course, they were also owned by a big insurance company, which I didn't know at the time, but they did fine. I mean, they did great. And so they made sure that we had extra insurance. I was still working at the time, but my income was not nearly what my husband's was. And so they made sure that we had some extra outside insurance besides what's provided by my husband's company, and then insurance on me. So that was really helpful that they did that, because it just gave you this peace of mind. So that's sort of there. So from a financial perspective, I don't think it would be a problem because of that.
Okay. And we'll look at that as well and evaluate some of that. And this is one I think you brought up, was just the long-term care event or the huge healthcare cost event. So you brought that up. Is there any way that you've dealt with that or considered dealing with that?
Well, we had a presentation in the past, and then we've talked to many friends, some of which have it and some don't. And there's a lot of there's weird packages that they can put together, because like our friends who have it were talking about how if he didn't use it, then she could use it, and vice versa. It kind of would pass on to the spouse. And there's so many different moving parts to it, like how long before it kicks in and what it actually covers. And then between that and sort of these little horror stories you read about in articles, then it just didn't feel like a solid surface to rest on. And, companies that did it and then decided they weren't going to do it. And it just feels like there's not really anybody you can rely on out there.
I like the way you frame that of there just wasn't a solid surface to stand on in doing it. Sort of like evaluating a auto warranty, right?
Yeah.
There's so much language, it's hard to know where the gotcha is. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we threw out the baby with the bathwater, but really the ultimate thing, it seemed like it wasn't really going to benefit us. And a lot of times, this I think was the same for reverse mortgages for a while. It seemed like maybe the companies weren't really in it to help people. It was just another product to offer. And I'm sure that in some cases it helps people, but then I'd heard situations where somebody tried to use it and, long-term care. And they found out all these like caveats, all these things that it didn't cover, or it has to be this much time, or it just really sounded awful. And so then I thought, well, I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope everything works out okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask the next question. Okay, if it's not insuring it away, at least until you find a good solution, what was the solution? And it's sort of, we'll deal with it if it happens.
Yeah, I don't think that's probably really smart, but I also sometimes don't think the other things are smart either. And everybody has to decide that for themselves, but it just felt like throwing money away. And I have to say, I probably have a general distrust of insurance companies. I don't know why. It's kind of like, I just do.
Okay. No, that's understandable. Whether it's insurance companies or attorneys or financial advisors, a lot of it's earned. So any other worries that I didn't address? Those are the big ones that I usually get. And we're going to, when we go through the plan in detail, because you haven't seen anything that I've put together, we're going to go through it step by step. And then once we get to a workable solution, assuming we have to negotiate a little bit, we'll stress test against all of these. Say, okay, what happens if you have low returns or if someone dies early, to see how robust the final plan is. So we'll stress test against these. But are there any that I didn't bring up that you think about?
Well, you talked about one of us dying early. I think, and maybe this plays into the same thing, but it's kind of like what's happened with my family, with my parents. My mother has a lot of needs, and she's basically, for all intents and purposes, lost her memory. That's a fear. That is a real big fear. And it may not happen to me, but, you worry about putting that burden on your spouse and your family. And I don't know if that's really what you're talking about, but that's a fear as much as, death seems like less of a fear than that.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is what you put everybody else through.
Yeah.
And also, when it comes to long-term care and, those type of events or Alzheimer's, is one fear I hear a lot is, okay, I go through all this and then I ultimately pass away, but I drained all the assets going through whatever illness it was, and then my spouse is left with whatever's left.
Yeah.
Late in life. So that's another fear that I hear.
Yeah, that's a pretty big one, I think. It hasn't worked out that way with my family. My mom was in a assisted living for a little while, and then now my dad brought her back home. I think he did it for a financial thing, but he's not really in any shape to fully care for her. But it's not that much to care for her, but it's, in some ways, I think it's going to create a burden on him that's going to affect his health. But I can't control it because he didn't ask our opinion. He just did what he wanted to do. Yeah. So he's a grown man, and I have to respect that.
In some ways, I'm sure you think, or he thinks, I'm just, not that I know him, but I'm putting myself in that. That's what you do if you're a husband or a wife or whatever, right? That's part of the deal. You take care of the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, right or wrong.
I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay, well, so I am going to get hard at work at putting all this together. And the next time we're going to talk is going to be on the webinar. So that's going to be exciting.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds great.
On your marks, get set.
Hey, welcome to the Smart Sprint segment where we set a very specific goal for the next 7 days so you can take a little baby step in managing your financial life and being a good steward. So what we've been doing over the last few weeks is putting together an ICE plan, an in case of emergency plan. So we've been putting down who the loved one should call first and how do I access digital devices and where are all the documents. Now, this week is sort of a big one. And we talked about some tools you can use to handle this one, but we're going to really have to dive into this one this week. And that is, how do we access your digital life? Now, we talked about individual devices, but I don't know about you. Everything in my financial life has a username and password. No, it used to be that when someone passed away, the way you pieced together what they had is you waited for the mailbox, right? You waited for the statements to come in the mail. And that would tell you, oh, they got an account over at that bank, or no, they got that investment account. Nowadays, it's more common that all those account statements are turned off and delivered electronically or accessed electronically. When I look at my internet life and all the things I have to access, I probably have 50 or 60 different websites that are fairly important that each have their own individual username and password. If I were to pass away, how does someone access those? That's what we're going to deal with today, is organizing all your usernames and passwords so somebody can access those. Now, yeah, you can put them all on a spreadsheet. You can write them all on hand and have them sitting around, but then you run the risk of somebody accessing your entire financial life. Someone recommended something called LastPass, which is an online password manager. And I use one called 1Password. I think they're both very good, where you're able to organize these things and have a tool that keeps track of them all for you. And as long as the key people in your life have access to that, if they need access to that, then they can automatically get logged into all the things that you need to manage your financial life. So I would look at one of those tools, either 1Password or LastPass, to organize these things. And it's really not that difficult to convert to using one because It's pretty intuitive. As you go to a website, it'll say, hey, is this one that we should be going to once you install that? An additional benefit of using a tool like that is that they can actually create complex passwords for you. So what's a complex password? Well, that's those pain-in-the-butt passwords that have lowercase, uppercase, numbers, symbols, minimum length of digits and all that. And each one has to be different or has their own rules. It's really a pain in the butt to keep track of. Well, some of these tools, like the two I mentioned, can do that for you, and they can actually create those for you. So like an example in my life, I use 1Password. I really don't know the passwords to almost all of my bank accounts and everything else because they're so long and complex, but I keep track of them in this handy tool. So that is your assignment over the next 7 days is find a tool that works right for you. Now, I have not done extensive research on all those out there. I just know that I use 1Password and I'm comfortable with that. But find one that works for you and start to organize this part of your financial life. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab today, where we noodle on something that hopefully makes you a little bit happier in this journey on Earth. So we've been talking about risks today and how we deal with all these risks. Now, unaddressed risks can really make you unhappy because if we know we have these potential things out there and we've never addressed them, either because we don't want to buy duct tape, but we also don't want to take the time to deal with them and make a calculation of what we should do with them, that makes us uncomfortable, which doesn't keep us as at ease to be able to be happy. So what I have found is that it's lack of control is a big contributor to being unhappy. But when you have a process in place that is repeatable, that you stick to, where you can have lots of little conversations to keep readdressing things in a natural rhythm, just having that in place, not that you have to figure everything out, but you have a process for addressing all these potential risks out there that you have to face. And you just keep iterating and slowly working the problems as your life unfolds. Just having that kind of process in place goes a long way to feeling like you have your hand on the wheel of your life, the ship. You have your hand on the wheel. Now, yeah, storms can come and go, but you have your hand and you keep making little adjustments. That goes a long way to feeling happier. So why don't you do that? Hey, I want to thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to sign up for 6 Shot Saturday at rogerwhitney.com so you can access all the resources for Kim and Joe's Retirement Plan Live case study. Until next week, this is the Retirement Answer Man.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.